All right, so again, talked about the social trends, tastes, traditions. What is popular right now? If you were making a movie, what seem to be the types of movies that pull in the big money at the box offices? Well, probably superhero movies. Marvel movies have done very, very well the past decade or so. So if you're looking for as automatic a success as you can get in the media industries, and we'll talk about this a little later today or maybe first thing Wednesday, there's really no such thing as a guarantee success in the media industries, because your fate as a media content creator is up to the audience. And you can do your best to predict how an audience might react and do a lot of preliminary research, but in the end, it's up to the audience whether they show up for your movie or buy your album or watch your TV show. And even if they watch your TV show, the audience might have a negative reaction to the show itself. Just look at all the... You remember fondly a year ago when all we had to worry about in life was how terrible the last season of Game of Thrones was? That was the only thing any of us had to worry about. And then comes 2020 and we worry about everything now. But a year ago, the most popular show on TV, a good portion of the audience hated certain aspects of the final season, especially the last couple of episodes. So your audience can still watch, but provide a completely opposite reaction to what you were hoping for. So again, you have to kind of take the temperature, so to speak, of society. What type of media are popular? So that's where we start. And then we move on to mandates. So you can think of a mandate as the goal or the purpose of a media company. And there are a few different types of mandates, but namely, and especially in the US, the main mandate that TV stations, movie studios, record companies, the main mandate they all abide by is a commercial mandate. So their main goal is to earn profits. And oftentimes that is through an advertiser-supported model. I think we talked about this a little bit last week. Your favorite show, if you watch it on the broadcast networks, falls very neatly and nicely into a 30-minute time frame. But if you go to watch that same show the next day on Hulu, you notice that it's only about 22 minutes. Where do those extra 8 minutes go on network? They go to commercials. They go to advertisers. And I mean, we've known this for a while, but it's still a little bit jarring to look at your favorite 30-minute sitcom and think that an entire 8 minutes of it gets devoted to commercials, especially when you consider there are usually at least 3 commercial breaks in a 30-minute show. Okay, cool. Nope, no problem. I'm just glad you guys can hear me better now. HBO doesn't have commercials, but they still operate under a commercial mandate because they want your money. They want you to subscribe, and they want you to keep renewing that subscription month after month. Now, that doesn't mean that because broadcast networks rely on advertising dollars that they're not going to try to create content that folks like. But they are going to try to create content that is going to be the least offensive type of programming. Which is why you tend not to get a lot of edgy stuff on the networks. Maybe later on, maybe 9 o'clock, there might be a cop drama that's a little bit edgy, has a little bit more violence than your average show that comes on at 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock. But for the most part, the networks are going to stick to the least offensive types of shows because they don't want the viewers getting upset. They don't want the advertisers getting upset. Because if the viewers get upset, then they won't tune in. If the viewers don't tune in, then advertisers get upset because no one's watching their commercials. So most of what we have called over the past 30 or 40 years primetime television has tended to stick to a mass appeal. Tended to be your traditional sitcoms, tended to be your nighttime soap operas, Dallas, of course, being a big one from the 80s. But nothing too edgy, nothing too controversial, nothing that's going to take away viewers. HBO, again, Showtime, Cinemax, all those pay channels, they want you to renew your subscription month after month. How do they do this since they don't rely on advertisers as much? Well, they make sure, and we'll get to this eventually, but they make sure there's at least one reason that you won't cancel them. So for the past 7 or 8 years or so, they've been banking on the fact, HBO's been banking on the fact that people are going to keep renewing their subscription because of Game of Thrones. If you have one mega hit, oftentimes that's enough to carry a pay channel like HBO from month to month to month, keeping your subscription money coming. All right. Next one. But in some other communities, some other countries rather, there are more non-commercial mandates, and there are even a couple of non-commercial type mandates in the US as well that don't worry about profit. They value something other than profit, these non-commercial mandates. And one is called a public mandate. So their main goal is serving the educational and informational needs of the public. This is where PBS comes into play. This is where NPR, National Public Radio, comes into play. And they rely mostly on, again, your donations and tax money as well. But most of the daily lineup on PBS, of course in the morning you're going to have more kids shows. But then you're going to have whatever falls under the general umbrella of educational television for the rest of the day. You might have, bits of drama, maybe a symphony, maybe the fine arts, maybe some Shakespearean plays later on. There's usually a news hour, and for the longest time, both these gentlemen have since passed. Jim Lehrer just passed, I think, a few months ago. Two guys named Robin McNeil and Jim Lehrer. The McNeil-Lehrer News Hour was always very popular for decades on PBS, and then McNeil retired and Lehrer took over, and then Lehrer just died a few months ago. But I think the program itself, it might just be called the News Hour now, is still pretty popular on PBS. And it's really the only news programming on PBS television. Of course, public radio has a lot of news throughout the day. And then NPR, National Public Radio, generally has news pretty much all day, but oftentimes they will disguise the news in hour-long programs, almost like news magazine type programs that used to be on TV. So that's a type of non-commercial mandate, public mandates that are there to basically serve the public, educate the public, inform the public. In other countries, not really here, in other countries, often autocratic countries, often countries that have some sort of dictatorial rule, you'll see a non-commercial mandate called a governmental mandate. And this is where the government pretty much has full control or full editing powers over what kind of news stories get reported, what kind of news stories make the air. And it's not like whomever is in charge, the autocrat running the country, sits there with the news producers and goes over the daily script, but certainly they have authorities from the government who serve as watchdogs, media watchdogs, to make sure that whatever is aired over the TV channels or whatever is printed in the newspapers does not offend the leadership, does not question their rule. And certainly most, I guess, common example of that would be what happens in North Korea. Don't see a lot of critical media pieces in North Korea about Kim Jong-un. In fact, we're starting those rumors again. We're not even sure if Kim Jong-un is currently alive. That was a rumor about 6 months ago, and then somebody sent a picture of him somewhere out in public, and now we're getting the same rumors again. So who really knows? So now transition from mandates to conditions. And conditions could deal with a number of subcategories like regulations that are put on the media, the technology that a particular media company has to deal with, and also the economics. Who owns a particular company? How much power does a media company have within their own larger conglomeration? Check chat again real quick. Let's see if you all are. Nope, y'all are good. So regulations to start with. That's where the FCC comes into play. The rules that all media companies need to abide by. Well, maybe not all media companies need to abide by. But media companies that serve the public airwaves need to abide by FCC regulations and rules. What do we mean by the public airwaves? Well, we mean the broadcast networks, NBC, CBS, ABC. We mean public television like PBS. Radio stations. Now, not the pay radio stations, not like Sirius. So really the networks and the radio stations that are provided free of charge to you, they all undergo FCC regulations. All you have to do is buy a car that has a radio in it, turn on the radio, and scroll through all the channels, and you can find whatever station plays the music you're most interested in. You don't have to pay for that music coming into your car. Because that music is accessible to anyone who has a car radio or home radio and hits scroll. The radio station has to make sure that they don't put out any offensive content. Because again, they're serving the public. Now, pay radio like Sirius, XM, the idea behind that is you are paying for that. And since you are paying for that, there are fewer regulations and restrictions. And if you are a Howard Stern fan, before he became a judge on America's Got Talent, he was the premier shock jock on American radio, mass radio. And I would listen to his show occasionally 20 years ago when I lived in Boston. And he was the original shock jock, and he was constantly pushing the envelope of what he could say and do. But even he would be very, very cautious because you could not swear over public radio, over mass radio. And you might have a little bleep button that if you're on a delay, your producer could hit just in time. But he was always very cautious of that. Then about 10 years ago, Howard made the switch to pay radio. And now he can say pretty much anything he wants, and he does, because you're paying for it. Same with HBO and Showtime. That's why even original HBO creations, like Game of Thrones, if you watch Game of Thrones, you've probably noticed they can get away with a little bit more than your average broadcast television show. Just a little bit more. But again, that's because you are paying for it. HBO isn't free to the public. So the FCC doesn't really find a need to regulate it like they find a need to regulate broadcast television. So those are regulations. Economic norms, I've already thrown about this word a couple of times, conglomerations, and during the very first week of class, first day of class, we talked about how Disney owns everything, almost everything. Disney owns everything except for the other part of everything that AT&T owns, and that third part of everything that Comcast and NBC own. But those are really your major media conglomerations. A huge media company like Disney that owns a bunch of other smaller media companies that might do totally different things, that aren't in competition with one another. We're talking about Disney's umbrella. Pixar is obviously quite different from ESPN. They're not working on the same content. They're not in competition with each other. But they're both owned by Disney. And we have something else called a consolidation. So this is when a particular industry, particular media industry, a specific media industry, is pretty much run by only a handful of companies. So for me, the perfect example of this is the video game industry. If you're chatting with someone you're meeting for the first time and they say, oh, I'm a gamer, I love playing games at home, your next question is probably going to be what?
What game?
Either what games or Xbox or PlayStation, right? And that's really the example of a consolidated media industry. Sony, Microsoft, and you can throw Nintendo in there as well, they pretty much rule the gaming industry. Because unless you're playing games on your laptop or your PC, you're playing games on consoles owned by one of those three companies. It would be very difficult for a small group to break that, and you know, it's almost a monopoly. not a true monopoly, since there is competition, healthy competition between Sony and Microsoft. But again, you have very, very few options in the video game industry. And then the last one, technology. What is the available technology at the time? And how does the available technology at the time influence your product? And we can talk about technology as actual gadgets and inventions, but we can also talk about technology the way I just discussed radio. What if you own a radio station that's on that spectrum that's available to the public, but you don't have very far reach? Your signal doesn't span out very far. And if people still drive around on long road trips and hit seek and search on the radio and find a station that's playing some music that they like, and then 20 minutes later it starts getting kind of staticky, that radio station that doesn't have a very strong signal is often kind of handcuffed when it comes to how they can rake in the advertising dollars. They can only really advertise local businesses that might just be in that particular town that they serve. And if their signal doesn't stretch beyond 20 miles or 30 miles, why would any company pay that station any advertising dollars if their business was 30 or 40 miles away? All right, next one. Now we move to practices. And the practices are just the roles of the people involved in a particular company, in a particular industry. Let's see, got a question here. Well, the FCC is obviously the U.S. when we're talking about regulations. Different countries have, it's similar but different. Different countries will have regulations, but they might slightly or totally differ from the U.S. But here we're mostly talking about, especially with the regulations in the FCC, U.S. media companies. All right, so for practices, remember, two types, creative and distribution, aggregation. The creative folks are those who actually make the media content. The writers, the producers, the directors, and of course the talent. And talent could be actors, talent could be news anchors. I think I told you last week or a couple of weeks ago that I spent couple of years rather, in media when I was a grad student. And I worked in a cable news station for about a year, and the anchors are referred to as the talent. So when the producer was scheduling that day's newscast, they would say, well, what talent do we want on the 12 o'clock news? What talent do we want on the 5 o'clock news? Which talent do we want on the 10 o'clock news? And all that was asking us, who do we want to host? Who do we want to sit behind the desk and read the news stories from the teleprompter? But of course, talent could be big-time movie stars as well, or small-time movie stars. A-list, B-list, C-list. Probably a D list of actors somewhere. But after a piece of media content or a text, media text gets made, they got to find some way to get it to the people. How do they get it to us? Distribution and aggregation. And we'll learn more about these two terms later on in this semester, but distribution is getting the product, and in the analog days, getting the actual album or getting the music album or getting the actual movie reel or the VHS tape or the DVD, having a company that would distribute it to the aggregators. And the aggregators are just the folks who would sell it, who would display it for the public. So Barnes & Noble would be an aggregator. Blockbuster Video, rest in peace, was an aggregator. Just about any physical place where we could go to buy a movie, or buy an album, or buy a CD, that was an aggregator. They still exist. There's still a Barnes & Noble. I mean, there's still several of them. There's one here. I've been in it once. But we're seeing fewer and fewer of these. Basically, we're down to Barnes & Noble and Best Buy. That's pretty much it. The need for aggregators is less, obviously, because so much media is digital now. But you could certainly look at Apple as an aggregator with its iTunes. It's still displaying the digital albums and digital singles that you can buy. You can certainly look at Netflix or Amazon Prime as aggregators, because they're displaying all the movies and TV shows that they have in their libraries for you to rent or buy. So we still certainly have aggregators. We just have more aggregators now that we can interact with from the comfort of our own couches. And fewer that we actually need to go to get in our cars and drive to. And then there's another kind of practice as well, something called auxiliary practices. They're not really the creative practices because they don't make the media text. They're not distributors or aggregators because they don't collect the text and bring it to the public and display it for the public. But they are incredibly important as well. Agents who negotiate the big dollars for their clients, for their actors and actresses. Unions who represent, and union leaders who represent construction workers who build the sets for movies. Caterers who supply the food for movie sets and TV sets. So certainly these folks are important as well. So if there's one phrase, actually I'll probably repeat several phrases this semester, but if there's one phrase I'll repeat quite often this semester, is that the media industries are a financially risky industry. Because of a principle that I hinted at a few minutes ago, the idea of nobody knows, the nobody knows principle. Nobody really truly knows whether or not something's going to be a hit until after it's released. Now, sometimes, especially in the movie business, the box office business, sometimes you can tell after a week or two of a movie's release If a movie does not have a strong opening weekend, then it will probably not have a strong second weekend or third weekend or fourth weekend. Movies very rarely start out with an average audience and then slowly build a stronger one or a larger one. And sometimes movie studios think something is going to be as close to an automatic sell as possible, especially a year ago, because studio executives thought, well, Cats is one of the most popular musicals of all time. Everybody's going to want to come to the theater and see it. And it turns out they were wrong. Nobody really wanted to come to the theater and see it. Nobody did. Very few people did. It did not do well. Uh-oh, the chat's filling up. A lot of people saw Cats. They're mad at me. Batman, Superman, yep. True. Justice League. Are conditions and practices separate levels of the framework, or do they fall under? Yeah, they're separate levels. Yeah, and I'm going to get to a slide here in a second that, I mean, Cats, we got James Corden, who is really better known as a late night TV host, and it's got Judi Dench, who is a fantastic actress who's been around for decades, but I believe she's also in her 70s, so she doesn't exactly appeal to a younger demographic. But sometimes you can get a huge star and pay them big bucks, and the big bucks that you would pay a huge star fall under the sunk costs. More specifically, the first copy costs, but the sunk costs. Because whatever you have to pay an actor or actress for their services, more often than not, you pay them up front, especially a big-time movie star. I'm trying to think who the biggest movie star in the world right now is. Probably The Rock. I'm getting some weird looks from the folks in the crowd, but name one who, you know, it's not necessarily saying best actor, I'm just saying biggest movie star. Any other ideas? Got chat going here. Let's see what chat says. Keanu Reeves? I don't know, Richard. Maybe it was like 1995. Yeah, I mean, when The Matrix was popular. DiCaprio, yeah. Yeah. I was also thinking maybe Robert Downey. Tom Cruise, yeah. Tom Hanks is a good one. Yeah, Tom Hanks. I'd like to see a movie with Tom Hanks and The Rock. Samuel Jackson, yes. Samuel Jackson is in every movie ever made. And look, he gets paid big money, but I'm trying to think of a movie that specifically advertised starring Samuel L. Jackson, that his name was the first name. We'd maybe have to go back to Snakes on a Plane. Because a brilliant studio head thought, you know what, we got a movie where a bunch of snakes get loose on a plane at 40,000 feet. Who do we want getting ticked off and trying to, you know, wrangle them all up? Sam Jackson would be good in that role. Jennifer Lawrence, yep. Scarlett Johansson, yeah, I would agree. Meryl Streep, Yes, I think she's going to be more selective, though. I think Tom Hanks is a good one still. Tom Cruise, I feel like, is on. Look, Tom Cruise, from about 1986 until probably, let's give him 20 years, 2006, I would say was the biggest movie star in the world. Will Smith's a good one. Yeah. Yeah. So those big names, Will Smith, Tom Hanks, yeah, still Tom Cruise, especially if it's a successful franchise like the Mission Impossible movies have been for him. If they want to do another Mission Impossible, then yeah, I would imagine they're going to pay Tom Cruise a whole lot of money, because his point is going to be, who else are you going to get? I'm already associated with this franchise. You're going to pay me what I want, because people won't come to watch a Mission Impossible movie unless Tom Cruise is in it. If it's any other movie, I don't know that Tom Cruise gets that automatic huge payday that he would for a well-established franchise like Mission Impossible. But as a studio, you're not getting that money back. However many millions you pay The Rock or Tom Hanks or Tom Cruise, that money is gone, that money is theirs, even if your movie bombs. So that's what we mean by sunk costs. You have already sunk them into a big-time actor or a big-time director. Or a really hot screenwriter. Not hot like attractive, like hot like popular. Like, someone who has written scripts for many successful movies is going to be in demand. So you might pay that person a whole lot of money for the rights to their script. Or the rights to their novel. Look at Stephen King, right? How many movies have been made out of Stephen King books? Stephen King is a very, very wealthy man. I think we can all agree on that. But, he certainly made a good sum of money from just the sales of his books, but he's also made a great deal of money selling his books to movie studios so that they can be retooled a little bit and made into blockbuster movies. Oh my gosh, there's a lot going on in the chat. Christopher Nolan, yeah. Oh, you guys are still talking about hot actors. Nicholas Sparks. That's good stuff. I see Will Ferrell, Christopher Nolan, and Nicholas Sparks in the same chat thread. This is This is getting out of control, folks. This is really getting out of control. Nick Offerman. I hope Nick Offerman becomes the biggest movie star in the world. I really do. I'm not counting on it, but I hope he does. And Will Ferrell, 10 years ago, yeah. 15 years ago. Let's see, Talladega Nights was 2006. That was kind of the peak of his popularity. I think Step Brothers was right around that time, too. I can't remember if it came before or after. But I don't think Will Ferrell is as automatic as at the box office as he was about a decade ago or 15 years ago. Which, is a really good kind of illustration of how sometimes really stellar movie careers only last a handful of years. Okay, I saw Steven Seagal, so I have to dismiss class now. I think that's just a rule. Anytime someone mentions Steven Seagal, that means class is over. And it's 10:10, so that's a perfect time to dismiss class too. So we'll leave off there. We'll talk a little bit more about sunk costs and other costs when we come back on Wednesday. Have a good day.